Hey folks, this is Ryan. I am here for my MDL Season 4 retrospective. I'm taking this one a little bit differently than I have my past retrospectives. While retrospective singular, I actually had uh, the entire Season 3 retrospective done way back when, and I just forgot to record it over and over again. So that one never got recorded, but it was a pretty similar format to my Season 2 retrospective. This one's going to be a little bit different because I definitely feel like this was a bit different of a season. Normally what I do what I normally did in my retrospectives was talk about some specific games and then kind of break down every mon on the team, how I felt about it. I'm going to be doing a little bit of that this time, but not nearly as much. This is more so about the mythical format, how I feel about the season, sort of why I ended up with the draft I did, the changes I did, and I also wanted to talk about MDL going forward, other draft leagues going forward, and just sort of my general plan and outlook. So without too much further ado, we'll kind of get into this. So preseason and draft obviously comes up. So the general draft plan I had this go, and by the way, this video might work pretty well as a podcast. I have basically no visuals. If you just want to listen to me talk and not read the slides, it's totally fine. Anyway, the general draft plan was to center around either Celesteela or Genesect based on my placement in the draft order, because I was just assuming that the Melmetal form that was like base Melmetal wouldn't get to me, which it did not. Maxwell took it. So that was a pretty safe assumption. To me, that looked like pretty obviously one of the strongest mons in the format. And I didn't particularly want to work with the Gmax version. And I had been wanting to try both Celesteela and Genesect look fun. So those were kind of the two main tier ones I was getting early in the draft. I ended up making a lot of rough drafts of teams, like just full out rough drafts just to get a feel for what might be available. And ultimately, I really liked the Celesteela comps. And I decided that that would be my first choice. It felt pretty versatile. I liked a lot of the early comps I came up with. And it felt different than what I had seen from other Steela comps. I had seen at this point Matt's team, and I had seen Gumi's team, and I even watched a few of El Flamingo's Celesteela games. So I ended up wanting to do something that was a little bit different from them. Kind of build a really, really, really bulky team was sort of the idea. So as I'm building this really bulky team, the general concept of the team was pretty simple in a respect. It was do really good chip damage with things like Arcanine, Azumarill, and some of those other big hitters. And then after that, you have things, and then use Raichu and Persian A as sort of lead options. And then after doing significant enough chip, well, Celesteela can then pretty much beast boost out of control. You know, once a mon is down to 40-50% or whatever, Steela can usually kill it, even without any huge amount of boosting potential. But I did have ways to let Steela just simply go off in of itself. I had Fake Tear support from the Persian. I also had Volt Switch procs from Raichu and a couple different mons with Helping Hand to also facilitate it. So the team's general concept was like, what if I can get it, because I had used Latios in GLDL and I really liked it there. And part of the idea of the team was, well, what if I can get a team where every lead also threatens a sweep? Like, if I can have Brutal Swing Raichu Latios, Justified Arcanine with Persian, Belly Drum Azumarill next to Raichu. Pissimian was just amazing with everything on paper. I'm not really going to talk about the bad mons on the draft, but man, Pissimian disappointed me. But the idea was that you would get those kind of setups off, and then you also had that consistent output that would be really hard to OHKO in return, because the team had so much bulk in it that it was difficult to typically like one-hit KO a lot of these Pokemon. You usually had to focus them down for 2 turns or so to really get those kind of kills. So that was the idea of the team, and sort of how I wanted to play it. It was built around a late-game max with Steela, along with potential just like super sweepy, like activate the weakness policy, go burr kind of stuff. So the PRs and kind of my own thoughts on them. So the team was ranked first in the PRs. by a pretty overwhelming majority of coaches, and I actually was initially pretty happy with the team. I was playing with a lot of stuff that I had been eyeing and wanting to try out for quite a while. I was pretty pleased with how it ended up turning out initially. I actually stand by the team being a really good Series 9 team. But this was not a Series 9 format, and I very, very much felt it. I think if you had my draft in a Series 9 draft, like GLDL or Premier League, it would have been very potent. But with some of the format changes, some of the move adjustments, and how the tier list shook out, it actually ended up, I think, being a pretty middle-of-the-road team. I don't think it was particularly bad, though. I do think it ended up being slightly more middle-of-the-road. I do consider the first place that I ended up getting to be mostly a result of genuinely great offensive-defensive synergy. I had consistent switch-ins to pretty much everything on the team. It offensively made a lot of sense together, and it looked like a team that would have torn through a lot of last season, like I was saying. And I did break from this more traditional Steela comp I had seen people like Gumi, Matt, and Flamingo use, when in reality, I think that I might have wanted to retrospectively, if I was to do this draft over and still build a more Steela-oriented comp, which I probably wouldn't do for this format. If I wanted to, though, I think one of those more traditional comps as sort of a base would have suited my own personal playstyle a little bit better than what I ended up sort of going for. So, I do want to talk a little bit about my record, because I am making this video having not made playoffs. This is the first time in a league I haven't made playoffs, like, ever. Which is pretty crazy. I don't count MGU. I took over for the last 3 weeks for Gumi. He already had a losing record. I wasn't trying. But I do want to... But this is the first, like, league I played a whole season and took very seriously and did not make playoffs. But I do want to talk about my record, because it doesn't look the best, but there is a bit of, I think, some misnomers there. So, do I feel I had a bad season overall, this being the first time I didn't make playoffs? The short answer is no. I don't really think it was a bad season. The long answer is it's a pretty complicated process. One thing I want to talk about, and actually I think Matt and a few others have brought this up, I was 3-6 with -8 differential. Even though 3-6 looks pretty bad, I took 70% of my games to game 3. The other folks who are 3-6 took anywhere from 20 to 50% of their games to game 3, with notably Jess, who ended up beating me out for the slot, being that 50% person. I consider game 3 sets to be a mark of a good player. There are some leagues that don't even have differential as the overall tiebreaker. It actually is just straight game wins, so that way a 1-2 loss is more in your favor rather than the differential of it. There are some leagues that actually work like that. If this was a league that was a win-based league, how many wins did you get overall in terms of just like simple how many game wins did you get, then I would have made wildcard fairly straight ahead, actually, which I'm not complaining about the differential league. I think that both of those methods lead to different sorts of conclusions, different sorts of incentives for players, if that makes sense. MDL incentivizes very specific sorts of playstyle habits that allow you to maximize sort of your potential in games. Whereas a league like GLDL, where it is specifically the head-to-head matches, there is differential counted, but it is the last thing that's counted. Then, meanwhile, in a league like GLDL, where I essentially would constantly sack Mons to get myself in a better position because I didn't have to worry about diff. So that element, I think, is important, though, because in my opinion, if you're taking especially players that are top of the bracket in your division, if I'm taking Dina to a game 3, Charles to a game 3, those kind of folks that had very comfortable playoff seedings, to me, that's a really good thing. That shows that, at the very least, even if I wasn't able to win out all of those games, I was able to be a competitor for those games, which I think is a lot more noteworthy than getting an O2 stomped, which did happen to me, to be fair. I did have an O2 stomp or two, but by and large, I was able to make most of my opponents sweat, and I had some really good sets. So, moving on from this slide, I do want to talk about some general thoughts. Some people are like, oh, Ryan's fallen from grace, and I don't really get that. Yes, I made finals last season, which was a pretty incredible run. But like historically speaking, even though I have made top four in most leagues and things like that I've played in, I do think these claims are a little overblown. During the regular season, I'm usually second to third in my division. I've had to play in wild card once or twice. It's not uncommon for me to end up kind of scraping my way into playoffs. I actually tend to, in most leagues I found, I do a lot better in my playoff runs compared to the regular season. You can look at GLDL and last season of the MDL as examples of that. By that point, I'm comfortable enough with the team, and by that point, I feel like I have enough data, and I invest so much more extra time into it that I'm able to kind of overanalyze to secure better win cons. So playoff runs I tend to do fairly well in compared to a regular season. Those tend to be where I kind of tend to shine. Most of the sets during the season I think were really solid. I want to specifically shout out the sets with Charles, Raz, Jess, and Anthony. I think all three of those were just really incredible 2-3 game 3 sets that I am very happy with looking back. There's a mix of losses and wins in there. And obviously I had other great games too, but those four, I did rewatch my whole season. I think those were kind of my 4 favorite games of the season that I ended up having. I mostly this season, I brought a lot of people to 3, but I couldn't clinch it out. And as that was as much a team issue as it was a me issue. It was definitely a little bit of both. This team was not particularly good at securing late game win cons. A lot of teams, and I'll talk about format here in a second, but in general, this format, your late game win cons, I simply didn't have the raw offensive stats for a lot of them or speed to secure those late game win cons the way that I wanted to. So that ended up definitely impacting quite a few different sets. So I want to talk about sort of how I feel about my prep and the in-game play of this season. So in terms of in-game play, I actually, this might sound really weird. In terms of in-game play, I actually think this is my best season. I feel like I had, even though obviously you make plenty of mistakes over a season, there are plays that I shouldn't have made at various points, that sort of thing. But like overall, in terms of just overall consistent play, good reads, working to the win conditions, I actually think this was my best season. After I watched over all my matches this season, and I took a look at some matches from last season and some other stuff, I was like, yeah, no, in terms of like actual play, this was probably my best season by a pretty wide margin, actually. I think the big issue I had in regards to in-game play was actually over-adjusting for game 3s, where I tended to lose. I was often a little too quick to throw out my plans. I was a little too adaptable and too flexible, and it cost me frequently because even if the game 3 was played well, by making so many drastic changes to my initial plans, I ended up ending up in territory that I hadn't really chessboarded out in my head to an extent. So I'm going to be really cautious of my game 3s going forward. The team had just terrible late game win con options, which I have chosen to avoid for future drafts. So one of the big problems I ran into is that, for example, into Toxic, my week 1, he had Hail in the back. So he outsped everything and I couldn't stop him, and my team had no counterplay to that. When I played Anthony, he had Weather in the back. When I played Charles, he had this nuclear Tapu Lele with Psychic Terrain that was just killing all my stuff. What I ran into, and another thing that we've seen this season a lot, is both Melmetal teams weren't really maxing their Melmetal as much. They were just like, okay, here's Melmetal at the end of the game, try to kill it. Which no one really was able to do. Both those teams had pretty dominant seasons, because a lot of these games ended up having a lot of late game win con options, and when my offensive stats are Arcanine and Celesteela, which are under base 130, and neither of them are very fast, I can't win. I simply don't have the board advantage. I don't have the offensive output to cleanly KO a lot of those mons. So the team had a lot of trouble securing late games, and late games where I found to be a lot more unpredictable this season, especially on my side of the divisions. I felt like a lot of the Blue Division games that I saw, because I didn't watch every single one, I watched most of them though. Most of the Blue Division games I saw actually ended up feeling a little more similar to Series 9 in some ways compared to Red Division, but one thing that was consistent was that it felt like the season prior, we had a lot of games where it was like someone would max, and then there'd be one mon left on the field, and it was a 2v1, and then you kill it. Or it maxed early and everything just sort of died, or whatever. This season, that was not the case. If you actually look, most games and most sets had very extended end games. Dynamax was also used a little differently this season, which I'm going to go into on this next slide, which is the format shift and sort of, I think, its significance. Folks in the red division I've spoken with have said they have felt the format shift by and large. There are a few kind of outliers on there, but a few people did feel the adjustment to transfer moves and mythicals. My dog is very excited. Sorry about that. Some folks I've talked with have discussed the feelings of that format shift pretty significantly. So my team did not have the tools that were working well in the format. Weather was working very well. I saw that a little more in the other division than my own division, especially with Anthony's team. But weather seemed to work fairly well in this format. Terrain was massive. I did not have any form of terrain control, and it absolutely killed me a ton of times. I lost to every single psychic terrain team I played, I believe. And terrain in general was very strong. It ended up being a pretty polarized mechanic, more so than in past seasons. I'm not 100% sure as to why, but I have some theories on that. Bulky redirection was another aspect that was pretty huge. This season, with a lot of mons getting follow me, there's a lot of really bulky rage powder going around. Redirectors were huge. I mean, most teams had pretty threatening redirectors. And even things like Magmortar, like for example on Dan's team, like if you actually do like offensive calcs into something like Magmortar and you just tech the berries that you'll assume it'll carry for you, it still eats those hits. Like a lot of those redirectors were pretty difficult to work around. My redirector was Raichu, which was obviously not the bulkiest, but we saw a lot of success from some of the bulkier redirectors. The other thing I want to talk about is the fat initial attacking stats. So what I mean by that is that a lot of these teams that performed really well had mons with very potent initial attacking stats. I mean, we're talking they had mons with, Genesect has 120 something, I think, in both offensive stats, but also tends to get the download boost. We had things like the Melmetals running around with 145s. We had things like Pult running around that were really strong. So in general, just a lot of the teams that did really well this season, Galarian Darmanitan did pretty well. There was a lot of mons that had just very strong offense without any form of setup. The other thing that worked really well in this format was Prankster. We made the decision to move a lot of the Prankster mons down a tier, like a lot of the good ones, as a result of the power creep, which I'm not sure if I liked that very much. I feel like there was too much value in those Prankster mons. Basically every Prankster mon I've seen has performed pretty exceptionally well over the course of this season. I can't really think of anyone that has a Prankster mon that didn't at least threaten a lot in prep or was really strong in prep. So if you look down this list, weather, terrain, bulky redirection, really good initial attacking stats, and Prankster, a lot of the things I was seeing from these top teams, I didn't have any of those things. My team had fairly low initial attacking stats, but a lot of really good setup opportunity. I didn't have Prankster, but I had really fast support. I had the Raichu Persian, but it was typically outclassed by the Prankster stuff. I did not have terrain or weather at all. My team had Tailwind and Trick Room, when the weather and terrain I feel like would have been a little stronger, which we'll get into. So with the team having been built around building these procs, having every team have essentially follow me and some form of low tier Prankster, especially in those really difficult matchups, made it really impossible to get any of my strategies working. And then in addition to that, my team did not have the best initial speed stats. Both Reich 115 was my highest initial speed stat, which was way too low, it ended up being for this season. With the combination of Tailwind, a lot of these things being pretty quick, and especially weather and terrain gives you that initial speed boost. Having things like Unburden, having things like just I have the weather out so I'm faster than you, and also Prankster having priority ended up meaning that I was often felt I was on the back foot in regards to speed. I couldn't get initial control. And yeah, the initial offensive stats were just lacking. Steel is only 107, which I think a lot of people forget. It lacked in damage output pretty frequently. Zimmerl hits pretty hard, Arcanine can hit okay, but overall they just simply weren't outputting the kind of damage I needed, and hell, even Latios was really not getting the kind of damage I was able to get with it in GLDL. And also, no spread damage hurt. My team had no real form of doing spread damage, like meaningful spread damage, when this season has had a lot of good spread damage, especially when I was discussing earlier late game win cons, with the fact that a lot of teams ended up having longer late games. Having better spread damage was very good. Having things like Dazzling Gleam, stronger Heat Wave than what Arcanine offered, things like that, Expanding Force, those sorts of moves have been Blizzard are all a lot better this format. So I just kind of went over what I felt were the format changes. I'm analyzing the top teams and I'm going, okay, what do I need to do? Because I realized without that Prankster support and something with a really high initial speed stat, so I needed something that was way faster than base 110 to threaten people, or 115, and I needed a really high attacking stat. And I realized without those two things, I couldn't get the season to kind of go back in my favor. So I ultimately dropped Latios for Spectrier. I did this after watching games from Maxwell, Dina, and Anthony primarily. I saw how well a lot of those initially high attacking stats of their Mons worked for them. Now, granted, Dragapult doesn't have is 120, but Dragapult is also paired with Riolu, which was, by the way, one of the only consistent setups I was able to see this season. So one thing I've told people is if you're having a rough season, you need to make transactions, you need to look at what other people are doing and adapt to it. So I was in fact practicing what I preach there. I also noticed that the usage of the max turns had shifted. A lot of the time, max mons did not sweep this season, to be frank, at least in Red Division. They didn't get, it was very rare to see a weakness policy go off, other than a few teams, Raz had a few games like that. But by and large, max turns shifted from sweeping with your max threats to whittling down stuff. A lot of max targets ended up just hitting the support options or getting the bulky redirector down low enough to where you could win the late game by trading. Max turns really ended up, instead of super sweeping, which I didn't see much of, games tended to last really long for the late game. I mean, we had a lot of games that were lasting anywhere from 4 to 6 turns after max was done. So my prep also shifted to account for having some more of those late game sorts of scenarios that I was seeing from a lot of different players. Now we go into the prep. This is probably sort of the most personal part of this little video, because it's the one I have the hardest time describing to an extent, because it's very personal. Prep was just really weird this season, guys, and it was really different than any other past draft season for me. I would say the whole season I felt like how I was prepping for most of the GLDL regular season, because during GLDL, I mean, I just considered myself a backup coach there for the regular season. I wasn't really putting my best foot forward most weeks. It was, for a lot of games, it was just like, I did my calc, I did my flow chart, I kind of threw something together, it felt fine, and then I played it. But that's not normally how I prep for leagues that I'm pretty intense with, such as MDL or MBC or things like that. Usually how I end up prepping for these kind of leads is it's really weird because it's not a flow state, because I'm familiar with what a flow state feels like. I've been playing instruments my whole life, so I know what a flow state feels like. This is a little different. It's a bit of this really highly fixated state. Usually it's hard to get my attention. It's hard for me to hear. I usually, like, I'm not hungry or anything. I'm like just focused on the game, and I enter this state and I prep for an hour and a half or 2 hours or more until I feel satisfied with it. And it's like this really intensive process, where I can accomplish a pretty enormous amount of work in a short period of time. And everything else kind of fades away. And I also usually, part of the reason I usually try to schedule my games later in the week is a lot of the time I think about the match in the back of my head, in the early prep phases, which I wasn't able to do as much for some reason compared to my usual. And since I couldn't enter that state, it was really weird. I couldn't. It was really jarring, that it wasn't something that was happening. The entire season felt very weird on prep, and even if the calcs and the flowcharts, they looked good, they didn't ever really feel very good, which I think was really important to me. And notably, the state didn't really go away, it just kind of shifted to music. I had a lot of very productive music and writing occur during this time period, where I would get in that state and make music or write a bunch of stuff or whatever. I did ultimately get it back, though, so there is kind of a nice ending here. Anthony was the first time that I had really gotten it back, and I feel like that's part of the reason why that's one of my best prep games of the season. It's just that during that I was able to really get back into that state. It's just something I wasn't able to control. It was just pretty weird. So sorry about the weird personal aspect of this, but it had a pretty significant impact on my season, and I don't think I'm suffering from burnout or anything. If anything, I actually had a ton of fun playing this season. This was one of my absolute favorite seasons in terms of just, rapport with my other coaches. I had some of my favorite games I've seen, so I had a ton of fun. It wasn't burnout. It was just something completely out of my hands. So now we kind of enter the more traditional part of my usual season retrospectives, where I talk about some mons. This time I'm mostly, because of that weird prepping issue, it's weird to say, but I have no opinion on Celesteela. I have no opinion on if Latios is different or not. Most mons I don't have strong feelings towards, because I really, even though I played with them for a whole season, I just don't have any real strong cognizant thoughts on how they felt, because I wasn't feeling them the way I normally do. However, there are a couple exceptions to that, one non-exception I want to talk about anyway. So without too much further ado, let's go into Spectrier. Spectrier was kind of my first major transaction this season. I loved it. I actually think this mon is pretty severely underrated in MDL. I think it should be picked up a lot more frequently for future seasons. I would give it like a 9 out of 10. Dude, the damage Spectrier can give out, holy crap. It is an absolute monster in the calculator. And if you can get like a helping hand boost or a weakness policy or even just like a nasty plot or a life orb, I mean, just holy moly, this thing can kill basically everything. Max Phantasm, I have realized, is a broken move. I really wanted Spectrier as well, because I was noticing both in MDL and some other leagues while doing research for the Premier League. While doing a lot of research for the Premier League, I saw a lot of Spectrier usage, and I noticed a lot of people paired it with really strong physical attackers, because like -1 defense is pretty severe on a lot of mons, and a lot of physical mons have good stats. Having something like Max Phantasm paired with an Azumarill or a Lurantis is just so nice. I loved the speed tier. 130 was very easy to work with. It wasn't the fastest thing on the field necessarily every single game, but it was so fast that it necessitated extra prep from opponents, and there was a lot of times when I could run it modest as well, which was pretty big. I could usually, into some teams, I could get away with running it modest. The bulk was pretty usable, honestly. I know the big thing everybody worries about with Spectrier is that it dies to like a soft breeze. Ghost isn't awful defensive typing. A lot of offensive dark types like suck. You can run it with Kasib Berry, fine. It actually, like, in terms of bulk, I was not usually too worried about it. Part of it was with the shift of I didn't really ever expect to hard sweep a team with Spectrier, which is weird to say because it has the chilling nay and everything. It didn't exist for that purpose. It existed to get like the 2 or 3 things off the field that I needed dead so that my late game could work out, which it was just so good at doing. And the support move pool was surprisingly nice. I like how its support move pool felt, because a lot of the time you didn't really need anything other than Shadow Ball, protect, and then you kind of had your choice of like Hyper Beam or Mudshot. Those were really the only 2 I ended up using very much. And then you usually had a slot open to tech Will-O-Wisp, Taunt, those sort of moves, and that felt really good actually. I really liked having that option on Pokemon like this and Haze, just to have something to mitigate other opponent strategies, and it gave it a little bit nicer role versatility. It did have some cons, though. It was difficult to position as far as leads go, and I really did rely on those back options to complete games. I just kind of was like, I'm going to max this, it'll do its job, and then my back stuff will finish out. So I really like Spectrier, though. I think that the limited coverage thing doesn't come up very much. Max Phantasm is such a good move, and Ghost is such a type that is not resisted right now in the current game and metagame, that like a lot of the time Spectrier was threatening to OHKO something on the field with Phantasm, and if it wasn't, well, Mudshot's good, Quake is good to give you that defense boost. It actually has pretty good Spit F, which can sometimes let you live a couple extra turns, and Hyper Beam to lower the speed stats of really fast stuff was good, especially for my back options on a mostly pretty mid-speed team. Now Lurantis is the other mon I want to talk about, and probably my MVP of this season. I really liked this thing, especially as I started using it in some of the late season. One of the things that makes it really easy to slot on a team is that Contrary is so synergistic with a lot of common draft techs. I used Charm and Fake Tears were the 2 I used, but I'm sure there's plenty of other moves you could use. I also considered Parting Shot at a few points. One of the reasons it works so well is that you're already teching Charm or Eerie Impulse or Fake Tears or Screech to handle other threats, but there's no reason you can't target your Lurantis with those moves to get it in a better position to win and like potentially sweep, which I did a few times. Very easy to slot on a team, just because Contrary is so synergistic with draft prep. It ended up feeling very good for, like, I would call it unusual win cons. I mean, when I played Anthony, my general win con into his Sun mode was Fake Tears boost with Lurantis, which sounds insane, but I figured he'd probably run a Fake Tears Meowstic. I knew my Cofagrigus had Fake Tears, and it worked because I also had the Spectrier, where if I could get it out under, or my Spectrier and Nidoking, if I could get them out, I could Fake Tears the opponent too, and get them OHKOs as well. So it ultimately, like, it just felt really good. I really ended up loving this mon. It was a really good anti-TR option as well. A lot of TR mons actually really struggled to handle this thing. And with the combination of Contrary Superpower as well, it was pretty potent. The main cons are pretty obvious. The typing sucks. I mean, pure grass typing. This thing didn't come a lot in the early season, and I don't regret it not coming a lot in the early season because it was OHKO'd by like everything. The typing's not great. I also often really liked running it with AV. I feel like if I hadn't been able to run it with AV, and if I needed to tech berries on it, it wouldn't have been as overall good. Also, the damage output without any kind of charm boost or superpower boost or whatever you want to, or intimidate or whatever, was not that good. It does need a little bit of support if you end up kind of going that kind of long-term route with it. I really loved this mon, though. I'd highly recommend it. I'm not necessarily sure if it needs to go up a tier, but I'm leaning towards it being one of the best options in its current tier, though, especially because offensive grass types are surprisingly valuable in draft. Moving on, I want to talk about Raichu. I loved this thing, actually, a lot. Even though it wasn't a bulky redirector, which I would have probably preferred, it still did its job very well. Solid redirector, absolutely outstanding move pool, especially with transfer. Raichu gets bananas moves with transfer. And I really felt like Raichu was consistently something I wanted to bring. It felt like something that was consistently offering the support I wanted for the team. I just really liked it a lot. My only real con for Raichu was that it felt like I wanted to run 8 moves every week. This thing has such a wide and good move pool, especially with transfer, that it was very difficult to determine what moves I actually needed on a given week. So that would be my biggest con, is it has kind of the opposite problem of 4 move slot syndrome. It's got like 32 move slot syndrome, where you're just like, I wish I could run 30 moves right now. But other than that, I ended up really liking Raichu. I'd highly recommend it to pretty much anyone. It's very good in draft. I don't know if I like it as much as Raikou in draft, just because I liked Inner Focus on Raikou, but it was very strong. This is the last mon we're going to talk about today, being Nidoking. Now this mon I want to talk about because I want to mention that I have drafted it in GLDL, I have drafted Nidoqueen in MBC where we loved it, and then I drafted it here. I don't know if Nidoking's any good. I don't have an overall grade for it. I don't know if it has some pros, it has some cons. I just want to talk about the fact that I have used this thing now effectively many times, and I still can't tell you if Nidoking is a good Pokemon or not. I keep drafting it, so it's got something going on, but guys, I don't know. Nidoking is kind of an enigma to me. I think tier 3 is fine for it, and not tier 2. But that's really my only thought. I just wanted to mention that Nidoking is a weird Pokemon. So to kind of close out this video, even though I ended this season without making playoffs, I do have some future plans that I want to discuss a little bit with both the Premier League and MBC, as long with MDL as well. So, Premier League, the draft is already complete as of the time of recording this video. I'm very excited to return to Series 9. I really, really know that format very, very well. And a lot of the things that I feel like I was having trouble with handling in the Mythical format with the team I built there are not things I have to deal with here. Not every team has redirection, not every team has weather and terrain, etc., etc., you know. And the Prankster mons were tiered sufficiently high to where they were pretty costly on a lot of teams, and that's good. I feel like this is going to be a lot more in my wheelhouse in terms of prep, and I'm pretty excited to return to the format. I really love this team too, initially. I took some lessons I learned from MDL Season 3, GLDL most notably, actually, and this season while constructing it. It feels very similar to an upgraded version of that GLDL Finals team, which I really loved that team, but the mons themselves were not very good. These mons are a lot better, and I think fit the role a lot better of what I would have probably done in that league had I not taken over midway through a draft. I really, really like this team, and I do plan on bringing the heat there. Do not count me out of Premier League. Even if this MDL season didn't go great, I'm feeling that my prep wheelhouse is probably going to start moving more in my direction, and I've got a real scary team there, and it playing in a format where I have made finals both time I've played in it, so I did earn that spot. Talking about MBC, which is going to be going pretty soon here. I'm actually going to be an alternate this season for the St. Delhi Builders, but I do pretty much plan on contributing as much to the team as I did last season when I was an active player and not just the alternate. I will be actively involved in the drafting process for that. I really love multi-battle format. I thought it was a lot of fun. I will likely play some games when the schedules don't align. Sakimoto and Maxwell are the sort of head coaches of this one, but even with that said, there will probably be times when Maxwell can't make it, Sakimoto can't make it, and there might even be times where they just say, hey, Ryan, it feels like you got a good grip on this matchup, you want to play. So I do imagine I will get some play this season for MBC, even if I'm mostly going to be operating as a background player the majority of the time. I'm very much excited to return to the format as a more seasoned player of it. I really had a lot of fun with MBC last season. It was one of my favorite draft experiences. I am very much looking forward to playing in it. So, and last, I do want to talk about MDL going forward. This is kind of some sad news, but it is very unlikely I will be present for Season 5. I will ideally return to Season 6, schedule permitting. I will still be active as an admin, and I'll be watching Season 5 pretty closely. I'm not gonna, not play a season and just leave you all in the dust. I'll likely at least try to finagle Maxwell to let me record PRs and various stuff I like to record. However, the actually playing myself as a coach is pretty off the table for next season. This summer, I got a pretty big job opportunity. There's a local college, and they are putting on a production of a musical by someone, and I was asked if I would be the assistant director for the entire show, and I said yes. That's a paid position. It's going to be a lot of my time this summer, and then I'm also starting my master's, and then I will also be working part-time. With all of those things stacked on top of each other, especially this summer into early fall, you know, it's super unlikely I'll have any time at all, really. I just won't really have the kind of schedule that allow me to play for any leagues for about a year. I'm going to finish out Premier League and MBC really strong, and then I will probably end up taking a break, and I'll come back for Gen 9, assuming that my schedule lightens. I will stay in touch with everyone. I also, if there are any live events I can make, I will probably try to be there. I am not going to learn the metagames. I will probably bring shitty bean teams and score real bad. But I would more so go to the live games just to be social with folks and to say hi and to catch up and have some fun and travel. So that's pretty much all I really have for this. My final thoughts. I hope you guys enjoyed the kind of untraditional retrospective. I know this probably went on for way too long and I talk very fast. But I thought that for this season, and especially with just some of the changes that have been going on, and with me kind of discussing at various points in general chat, that I felt there were some differences this season, and with some people not really understanding why I was doing some of the things I was doing, I did want a video where I could clear up this MDL season, talk about kind of my own future, what's going on in my life, and sort of just make sure that everybody knows that, like, I'm still here, I'm still having a ton of fun, and I am super pumped to return both to MDL for a future season, and I'm very excited to start doing some Premier League content and MBC content as well. So I'll be seeing everybody. Goodbye, and have a great rest of the day.